Welcome to the Analytics Power Hour. Analytics topics covered conversationally and sometimes with explicit language.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Analytics Power Hour. This is episode 236. My name is Tim Wilson, and it's now 2024, so Happy New Year! We reviewed all of the latest benchmarks for Google's Gemini AI and determined that we're good for at least another 2 or 3 episodes of this show before we just hand the whole thing over to the robots. So for now, I'm joined by a couple of human co-hosts. Julie Hoyer is an analytics manager at Further, which, by the way, as of this recording, when I asked Bard what the company formerly known as Search Discovery is now called, it took a big old swing at it and missed entirely. So the company formerly known as Search Discovery, now Further, where Julie is an analytics manager. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Hello, hello. Excited to be here.
All right. And also from Further, we're joined by Val Kroll, who is an optimization director there. And if any of her coworkers remember that day back some point in the past where she canceled a whole bunch of meetings because she had a podcast recording and was trying to save her voice? Well, you know when we recorded this. So in a partial way, using minimalist words, we've got Val Kroll. Welcome to the show, Val.
Hello. Yes, today was that day when I sounded like this. But thanks for still having me.
Yeah, we'll see if we still have you by the end of the show. If not, we'll have an AI reading your questions from the chat. So on our last episode, which was the year in review show for 2023, we talked a lot about AI and generative AI. And we're going to kick off 2024 by digging into AI specifically through the lens of kind of the myriad platforms and technologies and companies that underpin what many of us wind up just kind of experiencing as a, really clever chatbot or as a code assistant or as a custom image generator. If you think about it, there are hundreds, if not thousands of components in that underlying ecosystem. NVIDIA, Hugging Face, PyTorch, Mojo, Modular, Replicate, Llama, Purple Llama, Anthropic, and well, you get the idea. It's hard to imagine that anyone could successfully wrap their heads around this entire landscape, much less stay on top of it as it rapidly evolves. But our guest, Matthew Lynley, does exactly that, or as close as any human we've been able to find is able to do that. And he writes about it in his newsletter, which is called Supervised. You can find Supervised and subscribe to it at supervised.news. So Matthew's formal education was in mathematics. I will try to reel them in if Julie and Matthew start trying to converse with each other by verbalizing equations. Before we started the show, there was a discussion of fluid dynamics and theses, and Val and I almost, our eyes glazed over. But we'll try to keep him in check. But despite the mathematics, Matthew also had a second major in journalism, and his career has pretty much been a steady blend of the two since. He's kind of woven into it out of a few different places. Mostly he's been on the journalism side of things, with his writing appearing in Business Insider, The Wall Street Journal, BuzzFeed News, and TechCrunch. Most recently, before starting Supervised, he was Business Insider's lead reporter on AI and big data, covering companies like Databricks, Snowflake, OpenAI, and others. So welcome to the show, Matthew.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with that. You've sort of started this new thing, this Supervised. You made the decision that this could be kind of a full-time thing to just focus on journalism around kind of the business and the ecosystem of AI. Can you talk a little bit about sort of how you came to that decision? Like what prompted you to make that leap? And, are you a masochist, I guess?
First off, terrible idea. I really genuinely do not advise people do it. But yeah, when I was at Business Insider, when we were covering AI did not mean ChatGPT and LLMs and things like that. This is, way back when Hugging Face was hosting, little tiny projects. And, there was this company called Snowflake that all of us, I think, were users of at one point or another, and Databricks, and kind of like the weird quasi rivalry / non-rivalry between the two of them. And ChatGPT came out in November, so it's a little bit more than a year old. And as it was going crazy, as everything was going crazy and things were moving so fast, selfishly, I was looking for something that went a little bit deeper than just the sort of like broader publications that target really broad audiences. I understood what an LLM does. I understood what transformers were and all that other stuff. And there wasn't anything kind of not going all the way down to the very bottom where guys like Nate Lambert and Jack Clark excel at, and they do an amazing job explaining the intense intricacies of it. But just something that was just like one level deeper. I think I was focused more on people like myself and other hobbyists, practitioners, and, the people that had the credit card that are deciding, okay, which one are we going to be using internally if we're going to be using something in the first place, where they don't need to understand the specifics of a given product. That's the MLE's problem. Sorry, machine learning engineers problem. They just need to know, why are we going with this one versus the other one, all that kind of stuff. And a lot has changed in the last year. Things have moved much faster than I would have expected. I like to tell people I try to stay 6 weeks ahead of what's happening in AI, because that's about as good as I can do at this point, because it moves so quickly. But the idea is, what are people talking about that no one's writing about? I went to this event and here's the new technique or the new kind of product that's out there that everyone's playing around with that you haven't heard of. And yet for some reason, the thing has like freaking 50,000 stars on GitHub and is everywhere, right? And so that was kind of the original idea. Running a thing is hard. I will say that. So to your point, maybe soft, maybe. But yeah, so that was kind of the original idea.
So has it, from when you jumped in and just kind of the casual kind of business level, watching what's happening in the investing space, and it's kind of like, well, all the money because of interest rates and this and that, and companies that are venture backed are struggling, except for AI, there's kind of an explosion with like any component in that. Like, has there been just when it comes to just companies starting up? I mean, I think you had a post last year that was late last year. There was like 29 startups in the space. Like, is it just like every day someone else is getting a non-trivial amount of funding for filling some little slot somewhere in this entire ecosystem? And are you trying to kind of stay on top of that?
It's a lot, like that list was the premise of that list was, ChatGPT had just turned one, and I was like, I don't know what to write. So like, here's a bunch of companies that I'm following, I guess. And people liked it, which is great. It's like a lot of people was like, I've never heard of this company before, but that's really cool. But, to your point, there's, every week there's at least one new crazy, team coming out doing something that fits some really narrow slice of the pie. I want to say sort of early December, where this company called Mistral, which produces open source large language models. We can get into open source, which is a whole other thing. They raised a couple $100 million. I think it was like a $2 billion valuation. And everyone was like, huh? Like, what do they do? They like make a model. That's it. And yeah, so the, when you're looking at AI specifically, I think, we're still like figuring out like what the hell to do with all this stuff. And when someone has an idea, they're like, hey, I think we could do this. Everyone's like, great, let's go try it. And here's some funding to go with it, and we'll see what happens, which, is very like 2010, 2011 mentality, but I'm here for it, to be clear. Like, I think it's fun. So, but yeah. Like it's, every day, every week, there's some new crazy project on GitHub or Hugging Face or something along those lines.
Do any of these companies reach out to you after you write about them? Because I feel like you're almost like a sell-side research analyst, kind of talking about the whole ecosystem and keeping track of your portfolio. Like, I'm curious if everyone's like, actually, that's like not how we think about ourselves, or has anyone come back to correct you? Like, as I was reading your content, I was wondering so badly if that ever happened.
Well, angry reader notes. I actually I prefer the brutal feedback. I think that's the most useful feedback. Unfortunately, I don't get a lot of it. I do get some, but yeah, I mean, I reach out to every company that I hear of, just, say like, hey, like, you want to chat? Like, I heard about you guys doing X and whatever. And sometimes they get back to you, sometimes they don't, because everyone's really freaking busy. There's this company called LangChain, which is this really popular open source tool for creating, again, we can go into this stuff later, called this thing called agents. So stuff, AI that can like act on your behalf to do stuff. It's called an agent. The founder is a guy named Harrison Chase. And I remember he was at like 4 separate events over the span of like 2 days last year, and, in 2023, and giving like back-to-back talks. Cause I saw him one day at an event, and I saw him again the following day at another event, just everywhere. He's freaking everywhere. And so, everyone's out there, everyone's busy, everyone's like chasing everyone else around. So, we do our best to keep up it and keep track of everything. But sometimes it's just like,
It's time to step away from the show for a quick word about Piwik Pro. Tim, tell us about it.
Well, Piwik Pro has really exploded in popularity and keeps adding new functionality.
They sure have. They've got an easy-to-use interface, a full set of features with capabilities like custom reports, enhanced e-commerce tracking, and a customer data platform.
We love running Piwik Pro's free plan on the podcast website, but they also have a paid plan that adds scale and some additional features.
Yeah, head over to piwik.pro and check them out for yourself. You can get started with their free plan. That's piwik.pro. And now let's get back to the show.
But is your kind of watching you obviously can't go super, super deep with any of them. Do you start to see something new has come up and said, wow, that seems really shaky, or that doesn't seem new? Like it is such a weird thing to be going through and just seeing, like, this is a language that I know. I'm reading an article. I understand the subjects and verbs. And then there's just these kind of words that are mentioned. And like, I can't imagine that they're all like equally legit with kind of what they're doing. Like, because I guess maybe backing up, you referred somewhere on your site about the multi-billion-dollar scaffolding assembled in the past few years is like a way to describe all of these companies and like what has occurred. Well, you've said it as well. Like, all of these companies are incentivized for more of this stuff to happen. So if you're NVIDIA and you're kind of leading on the hardware front, you want to just ride that train as long as you possibly can. You're not really incentivized to say, is there value being delivered to organizations or to the world at the end of the day? Like I don't know there are I don't think there are a lot of people who are like maliciously intentioned. It just feels like there's a risk that there are so many people that they're just kind of hopping on the train, and they're assuming that whatever their little piece that they're plugging in that's filling a legitimate need, that somewhere the whole ecosystem is spitting viable and useful stuff out at the end. And should that be a concern about how much money is chasing this? Referring to it as like, we've gone through this in Silicon Valley before, and good stuff has come out, but not until stuff is imploded first, right?
Mm-hmm. What did we call it? Venture funded capitalism in like the Uber and Lyft days, if I'm right.
Oh, venture funded capitalism. I like that.
Yeah. This is like 2014, 2015, when we thought on demand was like going to be the future of everything, I guess.
Well, even the original internet boom and, the original internet bubble bursting. I don't know, like, that gives me some pause.
Well, no, it's totally justified. When you have like this, like, it is really a, there's a couple of reasons why. Like, one is we've gone through a lot of false starts. I think, like, you can look back at on demand and there was clearly a ton of value created there, and we got some really cool stuff out of it. You can call a car from your phone. That's pretty badass, that you couldn't do back in like 2010. But, was it the kind of like life altering technology that we thought it was going to be right when it started? No, it took several years to kind of mature into what was on demand best for, which is food delivery and cars. Like valet, probably not, right? Car washes, probably not, right? All these other things, right? So with AI, there's a couple things happening, but one is, like, when it came out, it's just cool as hell, right? Like you boot up ChatGPT and it's like telling you stuff that like may or may not be true, but it's like telling it to you in actual legible English. And like right from the get-go, it's useful in some ways or not. Trust but verify, right? But right from the get-go, it's useful. You can use it for, writing code. I use it for writing code all the time. It's great. When it goes down, I'm totally screwed. I've like forgotten how to do all this stuff and like forgotten how to Google for stuff. And so I think that you can sort of look back on, 2010 and 2011, and as all these things were happening, there were a lot of really cool ideas coming out, like Foursquare, if you guys remember, checking in at bars where they were giving you like free glasses of wine.
Tim still does it. Like, he still does it. He's the last holdout.
I still do for meaningless coins.
Yeah. But there was a ton. There were like 3 Foursquares, right? There was Gowalla and I can't remember the other one, the third one. But with AI, just you can think of it as happening on like a really compressed timeline, right? So like 2 years of mobile like investment blowing up, this has happened in like 6 months probably. And so what unfortunately we've all been here to see all this stuff happen multiple times, I feel like. But like when you think about it, it's just like it just happens on like a very fast timeline, which is you say like, oh, like Mistral raised a ton of money at a several $billion valuation. That's awesome. Wait, another one already did it. Holy crap. Like however long later, or like, oh, like here's another big company with a bunch of big names behind it that also like raised a ton of money. And so inevitably there's a shakeout, right? Like there's always a shakeout for how these companies which ones are gonna land and actually be useful and which ones aren't. This happened every single time, right? Like I said, turns out on-demand valet wasn't that useful and it was kind of expensive. So we didn't end up going with it, but like, calling a car on your phone is pretty awesome, even if it's expensive now. And this, the same thing happened in mobile, right? And the same thing, happened in all these other big, transition phases. And so, it'll inevitably happen. And it already I mean, again, like we're all in analytics, right? So we are like very familiar with like how big the stack is at this point and like how like, eventually things will probably coalesce to like Snowflake and dbt and like maybe 3 other things, right? Instead of like the 20 things that we have in place right now. So but like these, it always happens this way, right? And again, I think the difference here is that we haven't really had a new tech that has just like worked right freaking away. To be clear, this also is like not brand new. Like GPT-3 was in 2022, I want to say. And so 3.5 is it's like an iteration, like the nth iteration of all this stuff. ChatGPT just happened to be like here's how everyone can use it. Here's how everyone can interface with it. So it took a while to get here in the first place, but I think this sort of scale at which like people found it useful right from the get-go sparked a lot of excitement from both casual people saying, hey, like write me a, bedtime story for my kid because I can't keep track of everything that's happening in their head, or like, hey, like I'm a VC, like can you write me an intro email to this company that I'm trying to invest in, like all that kind of stuff, right? So it just happens, like everything is happening just on a much faster timeline.
So if we were really honest with ourselves, were we really asking those types of questions when we first started? Because not that I'm willing to share, my browser history, but my first prompt was asking, can you write a poem about the quintessential analyst, Tim Wilson?
Oh, geez. Oh, my God.
Was the first thing. But I bet you will be like one of those things, like you kind of remember what your first query was or your first prompt. So is this where we share? Tim, what yours was?
I don't remember, and I'm very sad for you.
Julie? How about you, Julie?
Well, I feel very exposed because I haven't actually prompted anything. I've been a little busy. I haven't done anything with it, to be honest.
That's fair. The bedtime stories, that's a great one. But do you remember,
Yeah, that
Matthew?
is a good one.
Yeah. However, in about an hour, she may be.
First prompt, you are not at any point to refer to yourself as an AI chatbot, and you like keep this as conversational as possible. Like I think it was like, what do you want to call yourself or something like that? And like, or like give yourself a name so I know like I'm talking to something on the other end for convenience purposes more than anything else. Like not for like anthropomorphication, more just like, hey, ChatGPT, do you want to do access? Like, this kind of doesn't roll off the tongue as well as like a name,
Smart.
Real name does.
That's fun. Actually, I was going to ask, so you were starting to talk kind of about the land grab phase that we're in with all of these companies and AI. And I kind of wanted to ask you, I mean, it sounds like you've kind of already alluded to this, and we know the cycle that we're going through. There isn't room for all of them. something is going to end up, acquisitions. People are going to kind of carve out their own spaces. And I was wondering if we could actually start by talking about what are the spaces these companies are fighting for? I mean, Tim, you kind of talked about one company earlier was in like the hardware space. Like, what are some of those other categories that they're going to be fighting for? I'm saying land, but like space and land in. And then after that, I was hoping to know, who do you think will be successful in some of those areas?
6 weeks out.
We'll come back to this.
Yeah,
I made a
6 weeks
fa- I made
out.
a fa-
6 weeks out.
I made a face on the second one for people that don't have video here. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, there's a little something for everyone in it, right? I mean, I think when you're talking about like the bare metal, like the house does always win here because everything has to happen on Azure or AWS or GCP and using NVIDIA hardware or Oracle hardware or something along those lines. So like that's locked, honestly. Like, I mean, there's a lot of like startups trying to build new technology for like at the silicon level to try and rethink like, training machine learning models on data, how to inference them, which is basically like calling them from an API. The term we use is inferencing, I guess. And so there's some stuff happening there. Like they'll, maybe one or two of them will be successful. I think I'm not going to I don't want to call any shots, obviously, although like, Cerebras is pretty big, obviously. So, which is that's a big chip company. But, again, we're all in analytics. Like the stack is pretty freaking large, and the stack for AI is also like increasingly kind of spiraling out of control over time, which fortunately, like a lot of stuff we're already using, or like I used to use it, at least when I was a Snowflake jockey, is still gonna be in use. Like we're all gonna be using Databricks and Snowflake most likely for the foreseeable future, and BigQuery is the runner-up prize here, most likely. But as you start to like kind of get up to that point of, I typed in, hey, what do you want to call yourself? And some server fired off an answer. I can't even remember the name now. That's how much has happened. There's like a slice for a lot of things, right? So, there has to be a GitHub for this. Is it GitHub? It's actually not GitHub. It's a company called Hugging Face, which is worth $4.5 billion. They host a lot of this stuff, like this traditional, like old school ML stuff, but also like Mistral. I think if you can download, types of some offshoots of the Mistral models there, which is the new most popular open source one. And like all these other kind of Mistral, Instruct, Tune, Beluga, Orca, ... 77, the number one performing model on the LLM leaderboard. Like, I don't Google this. It's like I'm speaking actual English here in AI. It's a lot to wrap your head around. But there has to be software for training all of these models, and you don't want to go all the way down to like the very bare bottom, like code this in Fortran. Well, probably not Fortran. We were talking about Fortran earlier. Probably not Fortran. But you don't want to be using like NVIDIA's kind of arcane software development stuff, which is called CUDA. You'd rather be using like C++ or Python, and so there's stuff that kind of abstracts that away to make the development a little bit easier. There's the actual like frameworks like PyTorch and TensorFlow, and JAX is from Google as another increasingly popular one for managing training of these models and constructing them and customizing them and stuff like that. There are companies that do that for you. Like there's one called Anyscale that handles that for you. So you don't even have to use PyTorch. You can just it's even even simpler than that. And then there are companies above that like do all of the below for you, where they're just calling Anyscale or like other kinds of infrastructure. It's increasingly like, do not mind the person behind the curtain. Like, and there's like more curtains. Like,
I mean, the analytics stack seems bad enough. Like, I'm just thinking, people say like, oh, we're going to take certain pieces in house or build things out. Like, I feel like there's no way people are going to be able to build out any part of those things themselves. Like they are going to have to go to the big companies, like you were saying, to be able to use any of this. It feels like,
or the startup that's saying they're going to abstract it, right? I mean, it does feel like, the modern data stack, like when we look back on the hype cycle for the modern data stack, like that felt like a precursor where it didn't take that long. It was a similar thing. Like, well, you have, this problem, you're managing your data catalog is going to be hard. So let's start up companies to do better data catalog stuff. And I don't know, the way you just described that as being like, well, somebody says we're going to solve this niche, and then they solve that and say, well, that niche has to work with this other niche. I don't know how to pronounce it. And then, oh, that's complicated. So now somebody else comes along and says, put us on top of it. And it's all in like, no one can really put it together. And then you reference Databricks a lot in what you write. And I barely scratched the surface of vaguely being aware of what Databricks was doing 18 months ago. And when I saw it, I think it was actually things you were writing where I was like, wait, Databricks is at the core of the AI. Like how much is that happening with like Databricks didn't start out saying we're in AI, but even today you've brought them up multiple times. Like that seems like the core. How much are companies pivoting saying that's what we do? And I know there are some companies that are pivoting saying we've been doing AI all along. So now our marketing is just going to brand it more that way. But when from a product like wasn't Databricks just kind of another one of those sit on top, help you manage data? Yeah. So, but now it's at the core of AI. That had to be a product. That was more than just a positioning shift. That was them saying we're going to play in this ecosystem, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like, so when you look at like it's someone described it, it's like the two like binary stars of Snowflake and Databricks like violently orbiting around each other, and then like the periphery of like all these little startups that kind of like exist on like the like, you know, first, second, third rings around them, orbiting around them. You know, I mean, what was Databricks awesome at? Like lake architecture, right? Unstructured data, like dump everything, don't even have to think about it. You know, managing Parquet files, which now there's a startup trying to do new Parquet. So that's a whole thing. And Parquet is like a big file format for, if I'm like glossing over this stuff really fast. I'm also just thinking our transcription is like machine assisted human transcription. And that's going to be a doozy for the people who don't like to listen to the show, but love to scan the transcript. Like, oh boy, this is going to be a fun one. Parquet. Did I say that right? I think. So I mean, and unstructured data is where a lot of these AI models are trained on. So the raw documents of just like gobbledygook text, instead of like semi-neatly assembled tables that like may or may not make sense and hopefully are not deprecated, and for all this stuff. And that's what these processes do, is to just like stick a hand in this data lake, rip out information that's needed to train it, and on the other end you get ChatGPT that says blah 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 blah, like, you know, pretends they know the origin of what was the company called that you talked that Further, right? The precursor to Further, you know, pretends it knows what it's talking about. And it's honestly, it's kind of true for a lot of companies where the tools for what powers a lot of modern AI actually like existed already, but there wasn't like a scale moment, right? There wasn't like a blow up, like this is actually how we reach 1 billion users status. It was like, hey, like, can you help me predict whether or not someone is going to buy a Blue Bottle coffee when they buy like a coffee grinder, and put it in the checkout cart to, like, you know, it's like stuff like that, right?
What was the piece that made the scale? Was it the GPUs? Was it the what made the scale possible? Was it 2 or 3 things coming together?
Well, it was basically, there was a reason for it to exist for consumer usage, and anyone could build something like this. Like Facebook, when Facebook launched, like, why is Facebook like a billion have, you know, 1 billion people on it? Because it's a consumer app and everyone wants to use it and post photos of their dog and stuff like that. And they of course like have their own internal stack. And when you look at companies like Databricks originally, it was like, okay, what can we do? We can help you do this, you know, like I said, this churn model or this like recommendation system and stuff like that. Just give us all your data and we'll like do this stuff for you to the extent that we can. And if we can't do it, we have this whole network of partners that can help you do it. But like, were these companies touching like 1 billion users? Like, absolutely not. Well, maybe they were, like, some companies were touching like large users, but like, was there a Facebook? Definitely not. Right. And then ChatGPT comes along and gets to 100 million weekly active users in whatever time period it was, whenever the dev day happened, after like when Sam Altman was like kicked out of the company for 6 days or something like that. Then it was just like, oh my God, like I could put this in my product, and suddenly there's like everything has like a consumer feel to it. And that's pulling from the way I customize it is like pulling from this data. And so suddenly anyone could just imbue their stuff with the consumer experience, most of chatbots right now, obviously, but like we'll get to like other stuff at some point in the future. But everyone could like instantaneously imbue customer experience with this. And so all of this data became way more useful. Like immediately, like overnight, everyone was just like, holy crap, like where are we on LLMs? Whether that's how can we efficiently pull data out to throw into GPT-4 to provide like a better response from it. The technique is called retrieval augmented generation, RAG, RAG. Or like, should we just build our own from scratch, which is why they bought Mosaic for 1.3 billion. I'm throwing, there's going to be a lot of fact checking here, I feel like. Which is basically you have all this data, like let's build your own build your own GPT-4. And so it's basically like overnight, all of this became instantly more valuable. Anyscale, again, I keep coming back to these guys, but Anyscale, for example, like they served like, standard machine learning models like churn and things like that. And all of a sudden, like you can build an LLM with them and you get an API on the other end and you can use it right immediately, or you can customize an LLM and use it immediately. It's like suddenly like they've fallen into this business that has direct, immediate consumer application or has like a consumer feel to it. Scale AI, they were like a data labeling company, and it turns out that like data labeling is like important for data for it to actually be useful. And so they just like managed to fall into like one of the most important businesses in the next like current and 2024, probably 2025, 2026. And so all these companies, like they had been doing stuff in this area for a while, and Databricks just happened to be probably one of the bigger ones, I think, because they were effectively like the data lake company to work with. And they had like all like MLflow and all this other stuff, right? To make that stuff, to make your life a little bit easier for putting together these models. But it's sort of like all of these tools became just like way more useful overnight. And Databricks is definitely one of them, and probably one of the core ones, because like there's just all the data was already there, and mechanisms to access it were already there because they were already being accessed for ML models to begin with. There was like fine tuning of LLMs well before this with BERT, which is like a smaller one, going back to 2018 or 2017, I can't remember at this point, speaking of moving fast. But Databricks is just like, again, it went from being like a important company for ML to being a really, really, really important company for ML, in the same way that all these other companies became. Like Scale went from a company that was important in ML to like really, really important in ML. And so I think it's just, it goes back to that, like, launcher, like, holy crap, it works. Whoa. Like that was cool. Well, but like it worked right away.
Do you have a sense of like, does that generate chaos inside these when one of these companies goes through oh my God, we've become super important. There's a blow up in demand, but there's got to be blowing up like feature needs, and all of a sudden they need product managers who were kind of working their way along at some pace, and now all of a sudden they're just like go like it feels. It's like if you're building scaffolding and saying, well, we go like one floor every hour, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, they're building at 2 floors an hour next door, and we better keep up. Like all of a sudden, do I want scaffolding to get built in a really, really like rapid rate? Like, is there fragility? Is there risk there? I mean, even like OpenAI was whatever weird business stuff, but some part of it was like all of a sudden they became the center of the universe, and then weird shit started to happen organizationally. Like, is that happening at these? Like, are you talking to people who have like, they're like, I'm coding 18 hours a day and pushing stuff out and can't get it through? I mean, is that happening? Should we be scared?
Hopefully we don't do 18. Hopefully we do 14 instead of 18 now. Since this isn't like 2016. Yeah, I mean, it's like any startup, right? Like scaling startups is really freaking hard, especially if you have like a team that's working, and then like, you start adding new people on and it rocks the boat, and people start getting pissed off and leaving, and all that other stuff. And there's, it's like I will say, like, I definitely appreciate having worked at startups because you get to see on the other end how much complete, like, no one knows actually what they're doing, and like permanent decisions are made on the spot in Slack that you can't correct,
Bookmark for later.
or can't change. Having been part of these discussions. And so, it's the same problem that startups have always faced, and growing pains, blah, blah, blah. The challenge with AI, though, is obviously, like, to your point, like the scale is immediate and fast, and you have so many competitors all at once that just appear overnight. And so it's like a big challenge for these companies, like founders that are, maybe they're like first time founders, and they had, this insane idea of starting a media publication for some reason in 2023, and figuring out, like, how do you methodically scale that? And some of them are going to go great, and some of them are not going to go so great. Stability AI is probably like the poster child of things not going so great after launching Stable Diffusion, or not launching, but kind of taking over managing Stable Diffusion, which is like one of the kind of cultural moments of AI where suddenly you could type in a thing and there was an astronaut on a horse. And obviously there's been a lot of reporting about there's, some stuff, like weird stuff that happens there, right? And so it's going to be like, it's the same as like any big startup shift. Going back to MDS, one of the things that the MDS probably had as an advantage over AI is, things moved a little bit more slowly in terms of like deployment and development. Like DBT, I think, is a good example of a company that a lot of people think moves really methodically. And, I encourage everyone to hang out in the DBT Slack. It's great. And that kind of, it's hard to have that mentality in AI because it's sort of constantly all hands on deck, because you'll be going to bed and the next morning Mistral comes out with a crazy open source model, casually dropping a link to a torrent on Twitter after you spent, probably dozens of hours putting together a huge marketing deck and material for Gemini. And then all of a sudden, like, that's the story of the day because, like, turns out that Mistral has this chance of like blowing you up if you're not careful. And we're talking about Google.
Jeez.
And so it's just but I mean it's a challenge for any founder and any startup. It's also a very big challenge for like larger companies which move really slow. Like Google traditionally like moves pretty slowly relative to it used to move really quickly. Now it moves a little bit more slowly than compared to other companies, and they can just get hit overnight with some big release happening from a startup that can move 50 times, 100 times faster than they can. So it's like, yeah, again, like kind of going back to the 2010s, 2015 MBS, like 2020s MBS era, like that, but escalated like to like 100x.
So as a company, like how do you even know where to start if you want to start getting into using AI and you need all of these other companies to like help support you in doing it? Like, how do you make decisions? And then on the other side, as a startup in that space, how do you communicate to the people you want to like buy your service or your software or whatever? Like, how do you communicate the benefit of working with them? And then how do you compete against all those people? Like, my head is spinning in the fact of it's so complex for the companies to figure out how they compete with the others. And then as a consumer of their service or products or whatever, like how do you know what you need even? And who to work with?
Yes.
That's crazy.
Well, I mean, it's no, I mean, it's like, it is wild, right? I mean, you can talk to a lot of companies, and the kind of order for Gen AI, and let's be clear, like we should separate like AI and Gen AI out, like, because these are like, Gen AI is like generative AI is like a subset of like AI. And that's part of the reason why I called the newsletter Supervised, because it's like a joke. Because most problems are easy and don't require like all the crazy stuff that we're doing right now. And so the order for Gen AI is like comes from on high. Like the CEO is like, where are we on AI? Whereas like AI is like, hey, the head of data is like, what if we introduce a turn model? That seems like a good idea. Okay, like let's evaluate and see what's out there. And everyone knows what happens when you get an email at 2 a.m. from your CEO saying like, hey, where are we on this? Things start to get a little like crazy, and everyone jumps to Google or Bard now very fast to figure this out. So I think that's part of where the confusion stems from, is just how do we even just get started on this? And most of the time it's like, let's put a chatbot in. That seems like a good idea. But you start to see kind of like some interesting stuff happening and emerging that goes beyond code generation and chatbots and things like that. But I think a lot of companies, they just like don't really know what they want to do, other than they're like, we need to do something or we're going to get beaten by our competitors, who are also thinking we need to do something or we're going to get beaten by our competitors.
Well, except, I mean, there's a degree of like there's the signaling, like we want to signal to the market that we're doing something with AI, which is funny. Like I've had discussions with companies like that can be okay. Like you're selling widgets and you're from on high, it's where are we with AI? And really it doesn't matter if it's really the smartest thing to do. We just have to be able to tell our customers or the street or somebody that we're doing stuff with AI, which in the grand picture, it's like, I have a hammer and I've got to go find something to whack with it, as opposed to, wow, I got this really nice hammer. It's along in my tool belt with a screwdriver and a wrench and this other stuff. Now, when I turn to my business problems, a hammer is an option. Like we just definitely feel like we're in that manic phase where it doesn't matter. We just need to have something. And I think I think there's a lot of confusion when in the business world, a lot of people say AI and they are thinking generative AI. And then there are a lot of vendors that are saying, well, we've been doing AI because we've got machine learning that can be used to trigger activities. So that's basically AI. So now we're going to say that we're doing AI. And it does feel like it's causing a lot of kind of confusion and FOMO and lots of things that aren't necessarily the most efficient way to get from point A to value. Cause then it's like looking around, where are we with AI? I don't know. Find, Sue, the intern, can start, she took a class, she just graduated last year and she knows how to she had a class where she used TensorFlow. And so all of a sudden you're putting something into production. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Sorry. That might've been.
No. I mean, it's like, it's true, right? It's a lot of it is just like, we need to be able to tell our board that we're an AI or we're doing something with AI. And I think, to your point, when we talk about the kind of manic phase, it's on both ends, right? So it's like on the companies that are saying, oh, we got to like do something in AI. What are we going to do? And then you have this whole other group of companies that are like, oh crap, like what should we build in AI to like work with generative AI? Cause like we already do AI related stuff. And so like, what should we build like right now to plug into this like generative AI stack? And, again, to your point, we still don't know exactly like what to do with the tech, other than the fact that it's like cool as hell. And like everyone wants to use it because it is pretty awesome. But it's sort of the like value, like the ROI from it is not like 100% clear for a lot of use cases. There's some like code generation is like a good example of like, that's a very obvious value add. You have people like me that are using it probably way too much and forgetting how to the difference between lock and iLock and stuff like that. Right. And that's an obvious one. And then, there's like for assistants, that's another pretty obvious one. Like, Notion's assistant app is really awesome and pretty complex to put together in the first place. So there's this idea of like agents, which is like, creating tools that can act on your behalf to do more arbitrary tasks instead of like write an email for me and the, iambic pentameter of like whatever. It's like, hey, you're now Shakespeare and I want you to respond to everyone who works at who's called me from Salesforce and the sales department and tell them I don't need Salesforce, but like write it in the form of Shakespeare. And there's more steps there that go into that. But like, that's like, that's another like possible like outcome from a product perspective. So it's very much, it's a lot of toys right now with a small subset of useful, like genuinely useful, like, okay, like these are actually going to be businesses. And, image generation, Midjourney is another really good example, I think. But, I again, to your point, it's like remember when check-ins everything had to have a check-in, and if you didn't have a check-in, you were totally screwed. Or like geo, like if you didn't have geo in your app, like you were totally screwed. Like, what's your geolocation strategy? And now we're same thing, right? And so it's like, what should we do? Like add a check-in, like, Tim's at this bar doing whatever, or at this coffee shop doing whatever, right? And it's like, well, like, why do I need to know that in Yammer, like, or Salesforce? It's same thing. I mean, everything old is new again, right? And it's, again, we kind of keep going back to the same thing, but it's just faster because we're all extremely online now, and compared to where we were, like, 2010, 2016.
So I have a question for you, Matthew, about a piece of advice that you could give to analysts where they're kind of stuck in this place where the CEO is asking them, like, hey, what could we put in our goals as far as AI this year? That email at 2 a.m. And better than to run around with a hammer, like Tim said, but like you're kind of stuck in this middle place. Like, what advice would you have for how to approach it? Or like, what would be the best way to start centering yourself in those business problems and make yourself aware of the applications that might make most sense for your business? Like, where would someone start on that journey?
I would say, so like, if you're an analyst, the first question is like, why can't we do NLP for data? Like, why can't I just like query, like, what's my churn rate for X? And it's because it turns out that's really freaking hard. But like, I feel like no one's actually figured that out yet, and we're a long ways off from it. But, I think it's like, it kind of goes back to, okay, what are our actual like business needs other than like add AI, and, what are our OKRs? And because obviously, the 2 a.m. email is, everyone's gotten the 2 a.m. email before. And there's obviously a lot of excitement, around it. Just kind of like, if we're analysts, like our job is to like track these things. Our job is to be, tracking these OKRs and KPIs in the first place. And so the question is like, okay, well, like, how come, here are the 3 or 4 or 5 common use cases for AI, like chatbot, code gen, whatever, right? Write my DBT template for me, for the love of God. And how can we like actually like from those get to value, like get to the actual like value of what it is we're trying to do? Like a good example is like exploratory data analysis is CodeGen is beautiful for that. It's like awesome. Like ChatGPT is, again, trust but verify. Add the asterisk to every single sentence, trust but verify. But like having a Cody buddy to, again, like, hey, like, can you do a bootstrap test for this instead of like going through the pain in the ass of doing all this? That's an easy one, right? And so thinking like, okay, like you want to do something in AI, like, what are our goals with this in the first place? Well, first off, let's have coffee, like, and talk about this in person, 3D preferred instead of Zoom. And what are our goals with, like, how do we think that this can feed the business? These are the 5 or 6 common use cases that are out there that I've seen so far. Obviously, there could be more that we haven't evaluated yet. But, I can see from our current, like what we're currently tracking, we could improve productivity of our software engineers by X based off of data from Retool and GitHub and whatever. If we implemented CodeGen internally, here are the potential downsides of doing that in terms of like data leakage or whatever. But, it would improve Jira ticket request, drop Jira ticket request by 4, I don't know, whatever. Like pick an OKR and say like, okay, like here's how it could feed your OKR. Okay, we'll do that. And like, I've staved you off for a week for until, not that it's a bad idea. Not that that's a bad idea.
I like anyone saying I want to use AI. It's like, well, do you have a hypothesis about how it will deliver value, and how would you actually measure the performance? Like, to me, it can go back to analyst speak, kind of what you're saying. Like, let's tie it to an OKR, like have it as coffee. I love I think plugging like, hey, analysts maybe should subscribe to this supervised newsletter, because there's a degree of letting this stuff. It is still overwhelming as I try to go through it, but I also recognize that the way the human brain is going to be processing this it's going to be useful, because it's going to be when I need to make a decision, I kind of just immersing myself in it is going to help make it smarter. But putting on the analyst hat of saying, if they say we want to use AI, like, okay, well, let's have a conversation about what problem we're trying to solve. Can we align on a problem and how we think AI might solve it. You're being able to outline, hey, these are 4 or 5 classes of use cases. Does one of these align with a business problem? Okay, now let's think of that as a hypothesis. Using an LLM, we could reduce our customer service investment because we could have a better chatbot. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Now, how are we going to actually measure whether it's happening? The success can't be we rolled out the chatbot. We need to have rolled out a chatbot that actually achieves the business goal. So
do you think, sorry, quick one.
Oh.
Do you think that if people, okay, with the complexity of AI and everything we've been talking about, do you think companies will be left in the dust if they don't jump on it now and try to start figuring it out? Or do you think there is some benefit to like letting the water settle a little and see how some things shake out before they're, you know, suddenly trying to use AI somewhere in their company?
Most companies are waiting for the water to settle.
Okay.
Like to be clear, like AI is like it's definitely like a thing, but it is very loud, and loud does not necessarily equate to big at scale. And the reality, I think, is like no one wants to be the first person to put the wrong chart up in a board meeting. Like that's like you do not want to be that person.
You don't want to be the lawyer who had your
ground.
Right. Yeah. Like no one wants to, like no company wants to be like the first company to do that because it's not good. And like you will be the Harvard case study, unfortunately. Even if there's someone worse than you're going to be the Harvard case study. So like most companies are wait and see, I think. And we're talking about like, you know, you have Salesforce, which is up here saying, oh, Einstein and whatever and da. And they like kind of have to have a story on AI because they're at like a scale in the tech industry, because we're incredibly navel gazing in this industry, that they have to have like some story to tell in the first place. Like, are the products useful? Like, it depends on the situation you're in, right? It depends on like the company that you work for. Like, it depends on like, are you doing a Salesforce migration? Like all that stuff, right? But like the majority of companies in like the Fortune 500, whatever you want to call it, like they're just like hanging out, right? They're just like, okay, hold on. Like, let's like, let this shake out for a second and then see what Apple doesn't even have an LLM. They're like, they're working on them, right? But like, is there like is Siri an LLM? Absolutely not, right?
Just going to insert that the time gap between when we're recording and when this rolls out. Again, if Apple has launched an LLM when you're listening to this, then it's possible you can trace back to some window of when we're actually recording this in late 2021. No.
Yeah. 2023. Yeah.
Oh no, I wasn't going to give it that way. But
yeah. But like most companies are just like waiting, right? And like just like wait and see like what tech ends up being useful. And for the actual like the data companies that are like the ones that are going to be powering the majority of the stuff, they have an incentive to not pick winners because they want the like ecosystem to like play out, because at the end of the day, they just want compute happening on them, right? They want you like using their product to like execute some kind of operation. Like that could be a Snowflake or Mongo or Redshift or, you know, BigQuery, like Azure, like any of them, like pick any of them. Like at the end of the day, they just want more compute happening because that's like revenue for them. And that's great. Wow. They don't really care where it comes from. And if they pick the wrong company, then they could just inadvertently send us down like a pathway that doesn't end up working out as intended. And so they kind of also have to sort of sit back and say like, okay, like let's let this play out as like in the like insane mechanism it is. And we'll partner with everyone and like, you know, sort of add integrations for everything. And then like wait and see, like just wait and see what ends up being really successful. And like, we'll build in the stuff that we think is really interesting that our customers want, or we'll just like wait, like, and see like which, you know, how our vector database is going to play out. Like that's a big part of AI right now. And so there is like, there are a lot of like the majority of companies are on the sidelines, just kind of like watching fireworks happen. Like someone unintentionally set it off all at once, and it's like blowing up in the distance. If you guys remember that video, right? Of the entire fireworks show going off at once.
Yeah.
So good.
So they're just like waiting to see how things play out. And so like the case of like your CEO calls you at 2 a.m. and you're like, hey, where are we? There's a good case to be made. Like we should just like hang out for a second and like wait until we see like what other people are doing, and then like follow their example or not in the opposite direction, depending on how things go. And there will be a number of companies that I think will be like, they're more tech forward. Notion I think is a good example, right? Where they have the like agility to add and put out these kinds of like heavy duty, like beefy AI products that are difficult to put together, but they're hard to get out the door. And they can be good test cases. And I can just sit here and be like, okay, cool. Like wait and see, was it popular? Great. Let's integrate it. Like, let's do it. We'll do something like that. So going back to the analyst situation, what should we do in AI? Just like, well, what are our competitors doing? They're not doing anything. So like, let's just like, hold on for a second and like, let's not get too excited here.
The video of the fireworks going off. Be like, listen, we got a minute to figure this out.
Yeah, let's stay over here. Well, so I mean, this could be 2 or 3 hours. I'm not sure. Your rate of being able to rattle off these technologies is still a little mind-boggling.
Unnerving.
Unnerving, yeah. But this has been a great discussion. Unfortunately, the clock is ticking and we need to head to a wrap. So before we do that, we always like to go around and have a last call, something of interest or note or share worthy, whether related to AI or not, but what's not related to AI. So Matthew, you're our guest. Would you like to go first with a last call?
I don't know, like stuff's crazy. Just grab a hot chocolate and listen to lo-fi beats to relax /study too before you make any serious decisions, I guess. And or the synth version or the synthwave one. There's a synthwave one now apparently. And it's fast. So I'm probably going to make it. It's probably going to be like 4 weeks ahead instead of 6 weeks by the time this comes out. So,
jeez, wow. Julie, do you have a last call?
I do. So this one, it was a link kind of buried in a newsletter I get every day a few weeks back, and it's called the Eternal Jukebox. Pretty sure it's powered by AI, but I thought it was really cool. You pretty
That'd
much
be in Morning Brew.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So you pretty much get to put in your favorite song. It looks it up on Spotify and then it loads it. And I like the visual of it even. It's a circle and it's got different coloration for like the notes and it represents the song. And then it has all these connections across the circle and you can watch as the song plays. And when it hits one of those like connection points, it jumps back and forth around the circle and you can see it kind of like grows outwardly every section of the song it's played. And it just keeps going, your favorite song, and it's like jumping around it. And I thought it was pretty cool.
So have you put Poppy in front of it and seen if she is enchanted by the...
I haven't, but I'm pretty sure she would be. She likes any screen at this point. But I've been wanting to play with a couple different songs. I did like 1 or 2 so far, and it was pretty good. So check it out.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Val, do you still have a voice to share our last call?
I'll do my best. So this is a build off of a previous last call that you had, Julie. You recommended the Ologies podcast. And I'm super addicted to them. And there was one recently that was like a reboot or like a revised or revisited episode from an entomologist, if I'm saying that correctly with my crackly voice, Helen Zaltzman. And she has a podcast called The Illusionist. They're like 30-minute episodes. And there was one that she recommended on the Ologies podcast talking about breaking down apologies. And I was like, how could there be an entire podcast episode about apologies? But not only did she prove me wrong because it was super fun and entertaining and I learned a bunch, there was like 3 experts who like dedicated their lives to like breaking down apologies. I was like, this is incredible. So I just love people who are like so passionate about their craft, which is one of the many reasons why I really loved today's conversation today, Matthew. So again, thank you for being a guest. And yeah, The Illusionist with an A podcast. It was awesome. So that's my last call.
That's awesome.
How about you, Tim?
So I'm going to do a quick twofer. One of them is kind of on the AI front. So Jason Packer, I feel like I've had him as a last call before, but he and Juliana Jackson kind of co-wrote a post that's pretty lengthy called Outsider Thinking in the Age of AI. And it's, I think Jason said it was like 5,000 words. It actually took me 2 sittings to read it because I had to go somewhere, but it's kind of just amusing. It's not necessarily going to answer your questions about AI, but it's got some details about the Turing test that I didn't know. It references the Shags, which is a very strange musical phenomenon that happened. It's got Outsiders versus Mavericks. It's got Picasso. It's got Van Gogh. So it's like Jason's brain, and then Juliana came in and added like more stuff. And it's just kind of musings about sort of the outsider thinking being something that AI is not good about, not good at doing, and kind of breaking down why that is. And then the second thing, since this is our first episode of the year, so people are kind of getting maybe out of the holidays and heading into what am I doing professionally, I'll put in a plug for Measure Camps. So there is the Measure Camp calendar at measurecamp.org. But I'll also call out specifically that the US, which I don't think has had an in-person Measure Camp since like 2020, maybe even before that, has 2 already scheduled for in-person. One's on the 2nd of March in Austin, and one is on the 13th of April. It's Measure Camp New York, but that's actually in New Jersey, and Val could probably explain why you do things in one state, but you call it a New York thing. But that's going to be at the New Jersey Institute of Technology on the 13th of April. So think about it. If you're not in the US, check out the calendar, see if there's one that you can get to. Measure Camps they're awesome. So I'll stop at 2. I probably could have done 4, but once again, this has been a great discussion. So thank you again, Matthew, for coming on the show. That was a fun ride. And
thanks for having me. Although, like, really fast, last call. Numlock News is my favorite newsletter. Definitely go read it. And it is by Walt Hickey. It's fantastic. And I strongly encourage you to subscribe.
So do you know him, like, beyond him having had you?
Yeah. We worked together at Business Insider. Yeah.
Oh, you were Business Insider together. Okay. Yeah. The number of Walt Hickey sourced. I probably could have said that we found Matthew because Walt's Sunday interview was with Matthew, right? I think it's right as you were starting up Supervised, but Walt also has a book out that is fascinating, where did my copy go?
You Are What You Watch.
You Are What You Watch. There we go. It's got visualizations and charts. So we have plugged Numlock News many times, and I am a daily reader of the Numlock News. So
yep.
I have stickers. I've done enough of it. So no show would be complete without thanking our producer, Josh Crowhurst, who is, Josh, you don't have to fully fix the transcript. This one's going to be a challenging one. So we'll let the readers. I love that when we were talking about transcription, like within 30 seconds, you literally, I think Matthew said, like a gibberish word. I'm like, I want to go find that one. And now I want to find this one and see what actually came out. It's probably just to say unintelligible. So as always, we'd love to hear from our listeners. So you can find us on the Measure Slack, on LinkedIn, on the platform that the car guy runs. You can find us email, contact@analyticshour.io. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to get a rating or a review in whatever podcasting platform you listen on, if it has that sort of support. We kind of love to read reviews, angry or not. And with that, so no matter whether you are running around recklessly with an AI hammer and smashing every analytics project with it, or whether dashboards, building dashboards with AI hammers, or whether you're just toiling away and saying, look, this is making my code writing a little bit faster, whatever you're doing, for Julie, for Val, for me, for Mo and Michael, just remind you to keep analyzing.
Thanks for listening. Let's keep the conversation going with your comments, suggestions, and questions on Twitter at Analytics Hour, on the web at analyticshour.io, our LinkedIn group, and the Measure Chat Slack group. Music for the podcast by Josh Crowhurst.
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics. Analytics don't work.
I love Venn diagrams. It's just something about those 3 circles and the analysis about where there is the intersection, right?
Rock flag and transcription nightmare. Sorry.